Thanks for joining our webinar this morning. This is the School Climate Transformation Grant webinar on setting up implementation success. And today on our recorded webinar, Jessica Swain-Bradway, Kathleen Lane, and Jeff Sprague, and let's get ourselves started. We're going to do some quick introductions, a really brief overview and a reminder of those performance indicators that you all reported on at the end of this school year. We're going to talk about building fluency, or our ability to perform a skill at a high rate of accuracy and speed. And we're going to talk about professional learning opportunities. And we will have some opportunities in here embedded for you to use to stop the webinar and interact with your team, ask some questions of each other, and use this as a learning tool. Our goals around the webinar are to, again, remind you of those performance indicators, give you some information about how you can build fluency in multiple tiers, PBIS, for your teams, and really think about the professional learning opportunities you currently have in your agenda for the year and how you can shift those a little bit. Our call line is integrated with Adobe. You can find recordings of the webinar. We're using Adobe to record the webinar. You can find recordings on PBIS.org. This recording, as well as recordings that happened previously, and ones that come up throughout the year will be posted there as well. So as you are watching this webinar, I wanted to point out a few things. In the bottom right-hand corner, there is a file pod. Let's click to that file pod, located in the bottom here. And that has the PowerPoint for today's webinar. You can download it. So when you access this webinar later on, you click on the URL, the recording, the Adobe Room will pop up, and you'll be able to grab that those presentation materials there, and they're great to use with your staff as you are viewing this webinar. So over in the right-hand corner, we have the chat pod. You may see questions pop up from time to time. If you're watching this as a recorded webinar, you will not have that option to write in the chat pod. So let's do some introductions. I am Jessica Swain-Bradway, Midwest PBIS Network. With me today on the webinar, Kathleen Lane. Kathleen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Kathleen Lane, and I'm a professor at University of Kansas. I look forward to the time with you today.
Yeah, and this is Jeffrey Sprague. I'm a professor of special education at the University of Oregon and director of Research Institute there. Glad to be on with everyone.
So thanks again for joining us on here. Kathleen and Jeff are going to jump in from time to time and move us through some of those content. We're going to talk about for the content of the performance indicators. These are really the goals that you are shooting for in having some evaluation data on how you're doing. And we're going to talk about getting off to a good start. So using what we're learning about how folks are doing with the school climate work and the amazing effort they're putting into it, but we're pulling some lessons to share with all of you about how to improve the learning for the folks in your district who are implementing. So as a reminder, the performance indicators for our local education associations or our district is we're really looking at the decrease in office discipline referrals, improvements in attendance rates, suspensions and expulsions in particular. We're looking for items around the rates for drugs and alcohol suspensions and expulsions, and the fidelity for implementing multi-tiers of behavioral supports. We're looking at the number and percentage of schools that are doing this. Now, all of these things are a work in progress, but we want to be able to track the progress of those performance indicators over time. For our state education associations, we're looking at training and technical assistance events. So how many events are being conducted within the district for the districts in your state? The number that are reporting an improvement in knowledge and understanding. So these are checks in understanding, pre and post assessment, getting some feedback from those folks, as well as you can be looking at the fidelity measures there, and the number of a percentage of the districts within the state that are implementing a multi-tiered behavioral framework. And these are all reminders. We talked about these in depth last year. There was a webinar that was conducted in November that is on the PBIS.org website that went in depth with all of these. As a reminder, you can access that, but wanted to make sure we brought that to your attention. So our context is multi-tiered behavioral framework. It is indeed preventative. We are matching the type and intensity of the intervention to the level of need. It's evidence-based. We're going to be implementing evidence-based practices within that frame. We invest in fidelity and progress monitoring. It's a team-driven process. And the philosophy behind, the big assumption behind this is we're teaching behaviors versus just attempting to punish behaviors through exclusion. And I wanted to give this a reminder because even though we have a lot of moving pieces and a lot of resources invested, some things that we're seeing from the bigger national scope is that when there's been fall downs, when there's been kind of hiccups, so to speak, in implementation and getting all the necessary pieces in place, we're finding that there are some key players who don't yet have fluency. They don't have the full knowledge of PBIS, of multi-tiered systems of support. And so they're not able to conduct their roles, conduct their responsibilities within that framework. And so we want to make sure to get everybody up and going for success at the beginning of the school year, that all of our key players within the school, our administrators, our counselors, our teachers, our district personnel, have working understanding of what their role is and the bigger concepts and the bigger ideas behind multi-tiered framework. So this webinar is going to talk about some strategies to make that happen. In particular, something that I've been finding, and I'm sure Jeff and Kathleen have seen this as well, that teams are getting some frameworks in place, states are getting training in place, and there's a momentum because this has existed for a long time. There's momentum for people to be still punishing kids, just excluding kids versus reteaching, versus increasing the contingent reinforcement for what the kids get for the positive behavior. And so we want to get people really focusing on the idea of prevention, of matching intensity and type of intervention, of teaching. We want to reframe and refocus. And this big shift requires that all of our players feel really confident in their knowledge around multi-tiered behaviors. So building fluency applies to all of the people who are implementing, from the district to the school, from the main office to the classroom. We need everyone to have that common understanding of our philosophical approach. We're going to teach instead of just punish, punish, punish. We're going to actually teach behavior to change it. And we need people to understand, that's our big picture. We also need people to understand their specific role. And at Midwest PBS, we spend a lot of time and energy trying to utilize what we know about best practices in teaching and learning to build fluency or build those skills for our adult learners. And this webinar is one example of one of the ways we try to reach out to grown-ups and help them figure out and remember the pieces they're supposed to implement within multi-tiered systems of support. So here's kind of a crash course. Best practices in teaching and learning. First, we're going to present the clear model. We want people to fully understand what this thing looks like that we're asking them to do. So if it's distributing school-wide reinforcers, we model that behavior. If it's for our administrative team, it's to support teachers in instruction, using administrators as an instructional leader, then we actually have to model for administrators what that looks like. So some of the things that we need to model and support our staff around are very straightforward, discrete behaviors, and some of them are a culmination of behaviors. But the best practices in teaching and learning, applying this frame is going to help us organize how we support those folks. So we first present our clear model. This is how we do it. We present a range of examples and non-examples. We do it this way. We do not do it this way. We want to show people the relevant features of what it looks like when it's done well and when features are missing or when we're not doing it well. We create multiple opportunities to practice, and this is really important to remember for our adult learners. We forget that teachers and administrators are human beings. It happens a lot. We tell them something, and then we expect them to do it. And if you think about how we teach math for kiddos or reading for our kiddos in the classroom, we present opportunity after opportunity after opportunity for them to practice and to get immediate corrective feedback. So we want that same model to be applied for our adult learners in a way that's appropriate for our adults. So simply giving people information at a staff meeting does not necessarily create opportunities for practice. And Kathleen's going to give some examples of those professional learning opportunities during the second part of the webinar. This is our frame for how we're going to organize those learning opportunities. Not only do we give people practice, we give them opportunities to get immediate corrective feedback so they're not practicing incorrectly, they're practicing correctly. And we certainly want to acknowledge correct performance. And this is an area that we see a lot of times not in place is reinforcement, systematic reinforcement for our teachers, for our administrators. Are we giving them, are we saying thank you? Do we have something in place to acknowledge what they have done well? This model or this approach to teaching is going to serve us regardless of the age of our kiddos, regardless of the age of our learners.
Jessica, if I could add some comments too, particularly back to the reality and the concern around exclusionary discipline and the outcomes of disproportionate minority and poverty representation and also students with disability, particularly when we think about that kind of a teaching model, as you mentioned, particularly for school administrators. I think we can all focus a lot on the need to give clear guidance to administrators and teachers about when and how to use exclusion, if that is a disciplinary practice. And the same, I believe, applies to the adoption of the teaching protocols. Many people in the audience might see that there might be resistance to adopt or resistance to implement. And in my experience, a lot of that arises from the people we're asking to adopt these practices really don't understand what they're being asked to adopt. And so the clarity of our teaching to the adults also needs to be written down, repeated, and as you said, when it does work, a little bit of praise. And just a reminder too, in a core PBIS practice is to routinely share the data, particularly around exclusionary disciplines such as office referrals and suspensions. And as we've consistently seen in PBIS research and hopefully local practice, when we do see improvement in the data, that should be a chance to celebrate and offer praise and effort. So.
Yeah, that's excellent, Jeff. That's a good reminder. I think that, I mean, there are a lot of good reminders in there. I think when we're trying to build their fluency around something and really get them very good at that skill, being able to filter new learning through that lens, sometimes they simply don't know what they've agreed to. And we know that there are, for some folks it's okay that we exclude kids, and they may not have the information about how damaging that can be, not just to individuals, but to the group as a whole. So that's important for folks to have that framework. And we certainly want to get people beyond, yes, I think I'll do this thing. We want to make sure that if they are in those early stages and they don't know what they're agreeing to, that we create opportunities to learn, opportunities to practice and get feedback that matches where they're at. So we have more intense professional development and more intense professional learning as we're building those fluency in those skills. And over time, we don't need as much. We're using those data that you're talking about to monitor and celebrate the things that we're doing well. And we're not as focused on acquiring those skills or building the initial fluency of those skills. And we really do need to consider how much unlearning has to be done. There are certain areas of the country where, there are certain places where it's just perfectly fine to use the old model of punishment and not think of exclusion as a problem, or not think of discipline as including a range of learning opportunities, which is what we're talking about through multi-tiered systems of support for behavior. And we need to consider how many opportunities folks need to get to mastery, to really know what they're doing and how they're doing. Kathleen and Jeff, you probably have seen this where as I've seen it where districts and schools where they start taking fidelity measures, at first they're doing really well. When they first start implementing and they're training in positive behavior support, they take the fidelity measures and they look pretty good. And as they learn more, the fidelity actually goes down. It's because they're learning what they weren't doing. They thought they were doing it before. And now they realize that they're actually not doing it. And so as they gain more knowledge, they are really being more kind of critical of where they are in this process. And we really want them to get up to mastery.
Yes, and I think that speaks a lot to what we're learning about, fidelity assessment, particularly when it's a self-rating kind of activity. It's going to vary in that way, and I think so. While the score may go down, which everybody hates, I think it's I appreciate your comment about it might just be a reflection of people's pencils being a bit sharper in terms of the valued behaviors that might go towards that intended outcome of less use of exclusionary discipline.
Yeah. I think we want to not just be aware of, I like that analogy, their pencils being sharper. That's a really good one. We have that group there, and we also have we have to consider what pieces are in place that get in the way of kind of sharpening the pencils, like what philosophical pieces are in there that impede our ability to self-assess accurately. We do know that having a coach at those self-assessment times can help guiding in an accurate direction, and we want to really know what the full picture is very clearly so that we can we can action plan to address those things. Like you can't really improve your cholesterol levels unless you know what they are to begin with. And so we want folks to have an accurate view. And I think we have to be really, really honest about what practices are in place that support the learning of our adults, the learning and practices we're asking our adults to adopt, all the way from the classroom to the administrative level. And then what pieces are impeding the new learning and practices. And I think we can use those fidelity measures to really help shape and identify what's supporting and what's impeding. And so here is an activity that you can stop the webinar. If you're listening to the recording, you can stop it and check in with your team. Theoretically speaking, you don't have to self-disclose, but theoretically speaking, what practices could potentially impede implementation? This is something to have a discussion about. And think how could you address some of these things. And if you can't think about how to address these things, if you have these outstanding questions, just a reminder, there's technical assistance available to you through the National PBIS Technical Assistance Center, but also by reaching out to your Safe and Healthy Students grant coordinator, grant manager, who can direct you to some local resources. They've been building their knowledge of those local resources as well. So I want folks to you can stop it here and do a little exercise with your team. We're going to keep the webinar going. When you're ready, just push play again, and you can continue to listen. I also want folks to not just consider the things that could potentially impede, but what do you have in place, because we're solutions oriented. We're going to focus on positive. We want to know what systems are supporting the new learning and practices. Right? We considered what was impeding, but what's supporting? What are your celebrations? What are the things that you already have in place? And so you can stop the webinar and you can check in with your team. What do you have in place that's going well? What are the things that are actually helping teachers acquire the new learning, administrators acquire this new learning, and really put those practices in place? And remember that our systems are the policies or the protocols or the things we think of as typical business, much time and effort and resources allocated they help us put things. I just want to, so this is an opportunity for you to stop the webinar and do that exercise, and when you're ready, push play again. I just want to check in with my colleagues here, Kathleen and Jeff, that if they want to jump in, anything to add before we move on to teaching the hard part?
I think we're good, Jessica. You go.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate you checking.
So something we talk about when we're teaching small kiddos how to do reading in particular, reading analogies, is we teach the hard part. And I'm not suggesting we treat all of our grown-ups like little kids, but I wanted to point out that when we're teaching, we identify for kids the stimulus features or the features of that skill that would throw them off. So when we're teaching reading and that silent E pops up, we may stop and say, hey kids, here's the silent E, don't let it trick you. So if you can already identify the practices and systems that are impeding fluency, you're identifying that silent E. And so you want to be able to teach that hard part, teach around the things that are impeding, teach the things that you know are going to be the most difficult for your administrative staff or your teaching staff. If you can identify those things, you can be preventative and support them more around that. And that's something for you to consider. Does the plan you have in place, your professional development plan, does it match the learning opportunities to the level of needs of your learners? Are you prepared to intensify your professional learning opportunities around the hard part? And that's something that you want to take a hard look at your professional learning plan going through this year. You always have time to add things, and you can add additional layers to that, as well as opportunities for people in the schools and the district to check in to get an idea if teachers and administrators are carrying out those skills with fluency, if they're feeling not only that they're doing it well, but they're doing it easily, right? They're accurately. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to avoid train and hope, where we just talk at people and we hope that they go and do that. And that's one of the foundations of multi-tiered systems, is those systems to help us make sure that we have frequent learning opportunities, frequent practice opportunities, frequent reinforcement opportunities. So something to keep in mind is that learning means the behavior has changed. We can see there's a change in the behavior. If I show you 4 plus 4 and you haven't learned 4 plus 4, you don't know the answer when you say, I don't know. And then when you learn 4 plus 4, you say 8. We've seen a change in the behavior. So we want to consider how we're able to teach and practice and see changes in our teaching behavior. So what opportunities do you already have for your teachers for learning, for learning their role in MTSS, for support staff, for parents, administrators, and teams? This is another opportunity for you to take a moment, stop the webinar, and talk with your team. Do you have opportunities embedded already for all of the players in this plan? And what do those opportunities look like? Do they have lots of opportunities to practice, or are you really presenting in front of them and hoping they're going to take something away? Are you presenting a ton of stuff at once and hoping something will stick? What we want is digestible pieces of learning, digestible skills, lots of opportunities to practice those and get reinforcement and feedback on those things that we're doing. It's a great opportunity to stop, and when you're ready, push play again in the webinar. Here's another one of those activities, and it's really just an expansion of this last one here. But I wanted to give some examples. I wanted to model. Look at me, look what I'm trying to do. So as you're talking with your team, list the learning opportunities, list the staff development components you already have in place. So reminders at staff meeting. There's a difference between telling and teaching. Telling is I'm telling you right now. I'm saying do this thing. And teaching is the opportunity for you to model. People have the chance to practice that skill and get corrective feedback on skill, and that you can see there's a change in the behavior being their verbal responses to your questions. Right? When you say plus 4 now, they say 8. When you say, how often do we distribute school-wide reinforcers, they say, we give them out as close to a 4-to-1 ratio as we can, 4 opportunities to reinforce behavior for every 1 time we have to redirect. For some of our schools and our teachers who are new learners, we're going to have to be more concrete. We're going to have to say, within a 10-minute period, I need you to give out X number of school-wide reinforcers. We're going to actually have to create a metric for them So that's something where we want to consider the stage of our learners. If you're doing just in-service days, how many in-service days do you have spread out across the year? How often, how many touches do you have? How many times do you have, opportunities do you have to interact? So these are things for you to think about as you're thinking forward about your professional learning opportunities. Do you model the skill? Do they allow people to practice, get feedback? Do people get acknowledged? Is there the opportunity for you to modify opportunities for them to learn based on their performance? Or is your schedule for the year for professional development just your schedule for the year and that's it? What opportunities do you have to layer learning, to layer practice and layer reinforcement? And we know that coaching support is a huge deal. Having opportunities to coach, to be coached, is a big deal for as we're learning how to do something and as we're getting better at doing something. So what opportunities do you have to support learning after that initial opportunity to learn, after the first time people have learned things? So this is another opportunity. You can stop the webinar and check in with the opportunities you just listed, the things you have on the schedule for this year for professional development. Take a look and see if you believe that they match these descriptors here. Now I'm going to pass off to Kathleen. Kathleen's going to take us through professional learning opportunities.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate the time. So as you're thinking about the information that Jessica has shared, we do want to create a range of professional learning opportunities so that all the stakeholders involved in making this change have an opportunity to be really clear in what their defined roles and responsibilities are, because as she mentioned, it's about changing everybody's behavior, not just students, but teachers and administrators, and we want the community to be aware. We want parents to be informed of this new shift in moving from a reactive model to a proactive model. And it will take time to make sure that people have a range of opportunities to receive information when they're ready to receive it, because as she was mentioning earlier, you just don't know what you don't know until you're there. So we're going to chat now a little bit about some different opportunities for professional learning. And I wanted to make you aware of this resource. There was an article recently published by our research team that was a survey of administrators' perspectives on what is needed in terms of professional learning, in terms of designing, installing, and evaluating these integrated models of prevention such as the ones that you're doing now. And in this particular article, if you want to jump back and look at this, there are 365 site-level administrators were surveyed to see what practices do they currently have in place at this time, and then where did they feel like they needed support in terms of professional learning opportunities. And at least half of all the administrators indicated that they were doing really well for most components of Tier 1 efforts, like modeling and demonstrating the behavioral expectation, giving kids opportunities to practice and receive reinforcement, except for they identified one main struggle was the instruction around the expectations. So in other words, when the behavioral expectations are established for what we want kids to know to be successful in classrooms, in hallways, during arrival and dismissal, with the use of technology, they felt like there was some informal opportunities for people to instruct those, but as far as doing it on a school-wide level was more challenging for some. Another thing that they learned as a part of this survey was that there were Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports readily available more so on the academic side rather than the behavioral side. And in particular, there were some major omissions in terms of systematic screening, which we're going to talk about now. Now, the reason I mentioned this article is that as you're thinking about how best to meet your faculty and staff's multiple needs, we want to make sure that it truly is data informed. In other words, what do they need to know right now, and what are they going to need to know in the future? So when Jessica was talking about planning out multiple opportunities, not just hitting it hard at the beginning of the year, but actually having a purposive professional learning map as to how to create learning opportunities for all your different stakeholders, that's going to be important. So one place you can go is to look to the literature for things like this, as well as your own site-level needs. One of the things that we learned in conducting that study is that many people did have school-wide expectations in place, so that was present in Tier 1, but what was needing improvement was the instruction around those. And it is a new shift for many people to take an instructional approach to behavior. Just like you teach academics, we want to give that same logic being applied to teaching kids social skills and behavioral expectations so that they can meet our expectations in all key areas in the building and in the larger community. So as you're beginning to install these PBIS components, these frameworks, we want to make sure that we have the professional learning opportunities that they need. One thing that was noticed across both elementary, middle, and secondary settings was that behavior screenings were the least likely to be implemented across the entire frame compared to academic screening tools. And behavior screenings are a method in which all kids, they're teacher completed, not student completed. So there's an opportunity where 3 times a year you can look to see which kids are displaying higher than average, either internalizing or externalizing behavior patterns, so that we can get in front of behavior challenges. So it's actually looking for kids that might need extra support before they have challenges in school. And in this particular graph, you'll see that academic screenings are really gaining traction, are being implemented, but as I mentioned, behavior screenings are being implemented less frequently. Although there's been a large number of behavior screening tools that have increased in availability that are both feasible, practical, and very effective in terms of connecting kids to extra supports. So here you'll see that in many schools they had those fully installed for academics, but far fewer schools had any indication that behavior screenings were in place. So that might be something that you would target for your professional learning. And as I mentioned also, in this graph you can see that academic supports at Tier 2 and Tier 3 were much more likely to be installed than were behavior and social support. So this information, by using the data to see where people are starting, it can help inform where you need additional professional learning to show growth in those areas so that you are well prepared to meet the multiple needs of students as you identify their concerns. So as you're listening to this webinar and meeting with your team, one thing we're going to encourage you to do is actually start to make a list of what your professional needs might be in terms of professional learning. What do you feel your faculty and staff need to know? What do you feel like you need all your administrators to know? What do you feel like you need your parent community to know? And then we're going to encourage you at the end of this to actually make a list of where you want to begin to create these opportunities. And to give you a couple ideas, I want to chat with you a little bit about One Systems journey and how they're doing this. One of the systems that we're working with here, they have now fully trained all teams in their 20 schools. So they began by first conducting a professional development, a year-long series to help build this framework for all of their elementary schools. And then the following year, they worked on providing that structure for building all their middle and high school high school and middle school frameworks. And so now they are all implementing. The middle and high schools are in their first year of implementation, and the elementary schools are in their second year. And so now to support them, if you look in the blue, I'd like you to notice that there are 5 touch points here in blue for elementary, and then 5 touch points here in blue for middle and high schools. And those are opportunities that the district has provided for their teams to come back and continue developing their own skill sets to take that information back to their faculty and staff. In the purple below, you'll also notice something called Project Empower, which are standalone sessions. And you can think about these a little bit like speed dating for professional development. So while the team is building their own skill sets, they've also created the opportunities throughout the districts where any faculty and staff member can sign up for these different learning opportunities, and parents are welcome to attend as well. So they're getting information about key topics related to the implementation that is occurring district-wide. Because we know that it's a big shift for many people. It's getting in front of behavior challenges rather than waiting for them to occur. The idea of reinforcing kids with behavior-specific praise for meeting expectations, not necessarily exceeding expectation, is also a shift. So it creates an opportunity to have these touch points and talking points so that the broader community can learn what is being shifted in the school setting. At the end of the year-long training series where people go through and build their PBIS framework for designing and installing this, I want to emphasize that that is absolutely not the end of your professional learning, is building the model. It's actually the beginning of your journey to see what more you might need. So as you progress through your implementation time, you might find that you have additional needs. For example, you might find that you need evidence-based strategies and practices and programs to support kids who need more than what you're doing at Tier 1. So you might explore things like check-in and check-out, which is the behavior education program, which has lots of evidence to show that it's particularly effective for students whose behaviors are maintained by adult attention. It also might be a place for you to realize that there's a lot of things that we can teach our teachers in terms of low-intensity strategies that can be built right into their instructional opportunities to support kids being engaged and decreasing the level of disruption in classrooms. So for example, you might decide that you want to create learning opportunities for your teachers to learn about how to increase kids' opportunities to respond. It also might be that you want to focus on increasing students' instructional choice opportunities. And I'm not saying like, do you feel like working today or not, but the choice of how do you want to show me what you know? Would you like to make a PowerPoint, a Prezi presentation? Would you like to make a brochure? It can be as simple for little kids as, do you want to use sparkly markers or crayons? But we know that even just these small little shifts in instructional choice can actually support kids staying engagement. Even just asking kids, what do you want to do first today of these 3 things that you've got to get done, that also is a way to support engagement. So we want to create this framework as a starting point, and it is important, as Jessica was saying, to define the expectation, give kids opportunity to practice and receive reinforcement for meeting expectation, but it's also going to be important to empower teachers to make sure that they have the full set of skills that they need to weave in these positive behavior intervention and supports into their daily instruction, so that behavior, in quotes, is not seen as something separate from academics. We're going to do this while we teach. And as I mentioned, the one district that trained all their elementary schools first and then their middle and high schools, there's lots of different ways that you can begin to install this. This is an example of one training model from an even larger district that had 44 different schools going through training, and they rolled this out. And in terms of allowing people an opportunity to train in cohorts in their district, and then they had pretty intensive ongoing professional learning opportunities for the first 2 years of implementation, which is recommended as part of implementation sciences. And then they had ongoing support from their district level coaches moving forward. And as you see this, it's like a little staggered rollout. And then some of those schools became model demonstration sites for other schools in their system to see. So it might be like, as this school did, as this district did, in the very first cohort, they had some elementary, some middle, and some high schools going through training. And then when the next cohort began training, they could actually bring in people who were in the implementation stages to tell them a little bit about their journey through the implementation. So it depends, of course, on how you've decided to install it and the scope of what you're training. But regardless of your plan as to how you're going to roll it out, we want to make sure that there are multiple learning opportunities to empower not only the team, but the full community of faculty, staff, and teachers. Here's an example of some of the professional learnings that are being planned out for the elementary teams that I mentioned. So here you'll see that they're starting off the year kicking off a focus on using their screening data to inform their reading instruction. In this particular district, they're going to be using not only their Ames Web, but also their behavior screening that they have adopted, and they're going to look at those things together so that if they've got a student who is low on reading skills, but also is really high on internalizing, meaning if they're shy or anxious, or if they're, having more pronounced concerns in terms of acting out, they need that information to support how they're going to intervene with those students. And then the second topic you can see is focusing on strategies to facilitate instruction, and that's going back to some that I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, like increasing their opportunities to respond, building in instructional choice, really highlighting behavior-specific praise in their classroom, providing corrective feedback, providing pre-corrections, because we want to remind kids of what they need before they're going into instructional settings. So when we think about all these offerings, I want you to notice that they're different for elementary and middle because they're in different stages of implementation. when you're thinking about those ones that were at the purple at the bottom of that professional learning map that I showed you, these are an example from another year of what a larger community did. And these are some of the topics that they kicked off. So the first thing they did is they hosted a 2-hour session, and I thought the way they did this was really nice. They arranged these to be not at a university, not at a district office. They actually found a country club that was not open on Monday nights, and they arranged for that to be a place where people could come and convene. The room would hold up to about 75 people and was close to capacity most times. And that first 2-hour session was held after school, and it started, I believe it was from 5 to 7 p.m. with a short break. So there was enough time for community members to get their kids home, get homework started, and then go back. And at these sessions were people like teachers and paraprofessionals and parents and school psychologists and reading specialists, and they came to learn about some of the topics that were the building blocks of these frameworks being implemented in the local schools. So you can see the first one was focusing on behavior screening so that people understood the purpose of the screenings. It was not to exclude kids. It was to get information that teachers could use to inform their instruction. So if I have a class that has a large percentage of kids that are really on the shy side, I need to know that. They're going to be less likely to engage in a large group discussion, but I might need to shift and instead do have a shoulder partner, talk to the person next to you, or group them in small groups, or encourage them to do a think, pair, share type activity, or I might use a strategy like thumbs up or thumbs down so I can still get them to participate, but in a way that honors their behavioral challenges. And then, as you think about these offerings in the local community, you can again see that these are spaced out, and there's no long-term commitment. You don't have to come to all 5. You can come to topics of interest to you. And as you're thinking about installing these in your own communities, you might start by thinking, what does the larger community need to know today? Like the concept of delivering behavior-specific praise paired with a ticket, that's a crux about how we provide reinforcement to students and to teachers for meeting those expectations. Some people will mistakenly confuse that with bribery, like you're bribing my kids to get them to do what they're supposed to do, and it's like you're not. Bribery is when you're trying to get somebody to do something that's not in their best interest. Drink it, steal it, smoke it. That's not what this is. You've defined a behavior that if they engage in it, that it's much more likely to help them to be successful in that setting and receive natural reinforcement, smiles, praise, etc. So we are using those principles to help shape student behavior, and the same will be said for teacher behavior. So as you're thinking about these topics, you're trying to figure out what they need to know. Another thing that we learned in that survey across one Midwestern state is that we learned that there are certain types of professional learning that are preferred in terms of access. For example, teachers or administrators indicated that they believe their teachers had strong preferences for in-district and during school day workshops, as well as practice guides. So people wanted things that were quick access and on demand. So when Jessica was talking about providing a range of opportunities, you might be pulling back at this thing and think, okay, how could I do this? You might decide, let's have 5 times a year or 6 times a year that our team is going to reconvene with other teams in our district to be able to problem solve around implementation and make sure that people are on the same page. You might decide to do some professional learnings in regularly scheduled monthly faculty meetings. Several of our instructional leaders have gone to this venue where they have a topic at every single faculty meeting. So it might be, today we're going to highlight behavior-specific praise, or today we're going to highlight how to weave in your social skills instruction into your academic instruction. So you're going to use like a pre-correction strategy to remind kids of what they're looking for before you go into cooperative learning lessons, or even before you head out to lunchtime or other recreational areas. So you might decide what are those bites going to be that you're going to feature in terms of your faculty and staff meeting. You can also go log on to PBIS.org and look for other on-demand resources, and there's a wealth of information there that you can use to see like what is available, what's ready for me right now, because people do not have the time to reinvent the wheel in pulling together these resources. Another place I want to mention to you is a place called ci3t.org. And I apologize that that little bubble is blocking it, but it's ci3t.org. And if you go there and you click on professional development, you can find a number of modules. Like if you're exploring the possibility of systematic screening, you can click there. There are YouTube videos. You can learn about strategies like how to do behavior-specific praise or build an instructional choice or opportunities to respond. There's things on self-monitoring. And those are on-demand resources so that they're available to you when you need them. So if you decide you want to roll out a specific strategy in a faculty meeting, you can go download those resources and have them accessible. And that is important, going back to Jessica's point about building fluency. We want to help people make connections as they're beginning to install this. One of the other districts, as part of their learning plan, also does a thing where they send out weekly emails. So their district person that is in charge of supporting this blended, integrated, comprehensive approach to tiered systems, their district person sends out a weekly email to all teams. So they go out to all 20 teams. And in it, they highlight successes. So going back to Jessica's point about examples and non-examples. So they're showing people how to shape teacher behavior. So they're getting successes. Like they'll feature emails from teachers saying, hey, I tried that ticket thing. There was one that came up not too long ago that I recall being shared where a student had their cell phone taken away because they were not using it correctly during class. And when the student came at the end of the day to pick it back up, the teacher that returned it gave the student a ticket because they handled the conflict very well. So they were mature and responsible, and so she reinforced that, handing her a ticket. And the feedback that came back was like, I was initially skeptical about that, but that kid's face totally lit up. I think this is going to work. Emails from administrators sharing the data, like we're seeing fewer office discipline referrals than we did this time last year. Having information shared back are all successes, so even if a particular building may be struggling with a bump in a certain area, they can see that it is feasible and it is possible and it works in their local community. Also, in part of these emails, they have what they call tips for success. So they pre-correct the teams as to what's coming next. Like December's coming up, it's going to be a bumpy month. Let's reteach our setting expectations. They are also, one district even making these little videos available about their successes. One of the local high schools, they actually had their vice principal make a short video explaining how they did their rollout plan, going back to how to teach those setting expectations. At one of the high school, they all had lesson plans, and so first period taught the first setting. They taught class-wide expectations in that matrix. And then the next day, second period teachers were responsible for teaching what respect, responsibility, and best effort look like in the hallways. And then the next day, third period highlighted what that looked like in the cafeteria and so on. So over the course of a full week of school, that entire very large high school heard about what was expected, and it was fun, and their instruction was paired with examples and non-examples and a little role play, but it made it really clear. And again, it's promoting positive interactions between adults and children. So part of Jessica's point about removing some of those barriers is that we want to think about what are the things that get in our way. So when she was chatting at the very beginning about if we don't plan for it, it's not going to stay on our radar. So really being intentional about creating dedicated time in multiple ways for your team, for your faculty and staff, for your community, and creating opportunities for professional learning that are accessible when you want them. Some people will definitely want to stand and deliver. Let me hear you say it. Let's have a conversation. And some people are going to want to enjoy it at the end of the day with a cup of tea and a click through a website. So our encouragement to you is develop a plan that is data informed. So you might think back to looking at some of those contributions shared in that articles about how people want to access professional learning and what the typical targets for professional learning are. And I would listen to your teachers. One of the things that we do in the schools that we support with implementation is as we close out each training, we ask the question, what do you need to learn more about? And we encourage you to keep track of that and constantly be responsive as you're mapping out your professional learning plan. So now I'm going to give you a minute to pause and go back to those questions that Jessica posed earlier and think about these learning opportunities. Now that you've seen this array of how could I do it? I could do it in, pulling teams back. I can do it embedded in my actual faculty and staff meetings. You might have learning opportunities with your professional learning committees or department meetings. What makes sense for you? Are you open to the idea about sharing with your larger community? Are you open to the idea to doing some flipped instruction where people can read about it on websites and come back for a conversation? So why don't you go ahead and pause and take a few minutes to have this critical conversation with your team. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Jessica and Jeff. And again, thanks for the time today.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen. That was great. I'm thinking that Midwest PBS Network has a lot to partner with you on. So we'll be emailing more.
I appreciate that.
Great.
Thank you, Jessica.
Oh, thank you. This is wonderful. I want folks to do the check-in with their team, to take the opportunity to really the examples that Kathleen shared, the kind of criteria that criteria, quote unquote, that we shared about how you form those opportunities in a way that you can make sure you are providing multiple opportunities to return. I really liked the examples, Kathleen, where they had them spaced out. It was multiple opportunities, right? And I really liked that idea of kind of the quote unquote speed dating for the skill development. I thought that was a really neat one. So we want folks to take time, pause the webinar, do some discussion, and think about what you already have in place, and if you're approximating some of these examples, or what you can take specifically from these examples. And please remember that as you're going through this process, as you're sitting with your team and planning, if you're not sitting right there with your technical assistance provider, your local provider, that you do reach out and ask questions, and also ask questions of us. And that one thing I want to make sure that I really wanted to end with reinforcement, because we go on a very low schedule of reinforcement. We operate on a very low schedule of reinforcement, and we know that it's very powerful. Specific praise is very powerful. Telling teachers they're doing a good job is very, very powerful. And so we want to make sure that that as you're thinking through these professional learning opportunities, you're also considering how you acknowledge folks for doing these things. I mean, I love the example of having the meeting at the community country club, having a break. You have some snacks in there. You have the opportunity to talk with other adults. Those types of things are reinforcing for us as grown-ups. And so making sure that your systems are not just about giving people information, but then practicing them, getting feedback, and actually getting reinforced in some way, shape, or form for having those behaviors. I have a great example from a school in the Pacific Northwest. The teachers needed to have their online grade books updated by a certain day each week, because the kids were responsible for going in and completing makeup work by a certain date, and it was for a high school. And some of the students and parents were saying, well, I can't because, Teacher Bradway, she didn't get her grade book updated. And so the principal said, my expectations for the teachers are that they're updated by such and such a day every week, and I really need to, this is how we do it. We gave people, made sure they had instructions, they had a little cheat sheet, they got email reminders. And he also said, every week I'm going to randomly check 7 teachers' grade books. I'm going to literally pull your name out of a hat and I'm going to check. And if you're up to date, I'm going to buy you the morning coffee beverage of your choice and I'm going to bring it to your classroom. And he did that. And of course, there was an uptake in teachers getting those grade books up to date. So that's one example. We want to make sure that we make that systematic. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us. Please also feel free to contact your local technical assistance director. Thank you for everyone's time and attention in this webinar today. This will be posted at www.pbis.org, and folks can access it once it is up there. And we wish you all very good luck in building fluency, making those professional learning opportunities really meaningful and relevant to your learners. And everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.